Hi, this is Charlie Mato-Toyela, and today I'm here with my cousin Ruth. She's one of our family's historians, my dad's side of the family, and she has kept so much information about our family history and about a lot of Native American, specifically and especially Cherokee history, as a lot of us do. And we have gone out while I've been visiting and we have taken some long road trips and gone to some beautiful places in Tennessee, among others, and have been to a Trail of Tears monument and went and read some names on there, some family names and some people that we recognized on that Trail of Tears monument. We've also seen and talked about some history while we've been visiting. It's not the first time we've had this visit, and we've had other opportunities. Like Ruth, I have a couple of other cousins who keep track of a lot of our family history, and once in a while we'll run across something, like in some of these books that I'll talk about in a minute, but we'll run across something and we'll make a note there and come back and look at it later, and then we'll compare notes and see what we find out from other people. So there were a couple of things that I wanted to ask Ruth. Ruth has, she's worked in the education board, as a lot of people have, I'm guessing, that know about Native American history. And there's a couple of questions that I have that I want to ask you. Now, we've talked about Native American identity. There's people that are members of federally recognized tribes. There's people that are members of state recognized tribes. There's people that are members of tribes that aren't recognized by the government at all. Most of the time, those tribes exist in places where they don't have, like we were talking, a Bureau of Indian Affairs liaison that communicates with the tribes. Like in Alabama, we have the Alabama Indian Affairs Commission. There used to be an Indian Affairs Commission in Tennessee because one of my friends, who was a member of our tribe, used to be on the Tennessee Indian Affairs Commission, and somehow it got destroyed or it fizzled out, or I don't know how you would say it, but it doesn't exist any longer. And so that made it difficult for some state recognized tribes in Tennessee to exist. Officially, that is. But with all these different designations, and then you've got people that are native, which is the one we were talking about earlier, that aren't a member of any tribe. I know that when you were in the school system, that you had to see kids from all different races come through the school. And you got to see them from the time they were really young until they graduated. Did you see kids in the schools that were probably Native American? Just by looking at them, you think, that kid's probably Native American?
Yes, I could, after I got to know them a little better, not just first day of classes, I could pick up on maybe some of their cultures or some of the things that they did, or maybe some of the words that they used, some of the things or phrases that they said. That would help me to better understand that perhaps, yes, they were Native American. And I taught in the Bradley County school system in Bradley County, and it's very rich in Cherokee history. A lot of Cherokees lived in that area. So I knew that background, I knew that basis. So those, I began to recognize some of the names of the children as they would come into my classes, and oh yeah, they could be from the Cherokee tribe, or so yes, I could recognize that.
That sounds like a habit I was telling you I have gotten into, where every time I see some new person's name, I always have to look it up in the family tree and see if we're related or not. And it turns out half the time we're cousins.
Yes, as we found out this past weekend when we went down to the Trail of Tears monument there on the Tennessee River. Yes, so which is in Meigs County now. Right,
which, like I said, I looked Meigs up, and even though he was the government's liaison to Native people, we probably related to him too, even though, he may not have been on the side we were rooting for. But anyway, I told you that before my wife and I got here, that we had stopped at a little restaurant, and a young lady that served us reminded me of a Cherokee friend of mine from Oklahoma. Now, this young lady, she had a very Tennessee accent, which, there's neither here nor there, I guess. It doesn't prove
It's
anything.
beautiful. The Tennessee accent is beautiful.
It is. I mean, it's just as pretty as that smell that I smell outside when we go out there. It smells like sweetgrass to me, but I know that's not what it is. But anyway, she had a very Tennessee accent. I'm confident she grew up here. I didn't ask her what her family lineage was. I didn't ask her if she was Cherokee or Native American or anything. I just remember that she reminded me of a friend of mine from Oklahoma, and she looked a lot like her in the face. Super nice young lady, good waitress. I'd love to give kudos and prop to her restaurant, but I don't remember her name. I do know I have it on my little receipt, but it's not necessary. But anyway, I had wondered while I was sitting there if she knew anything about her family, because I recognized her as being Native right off. But that doesn't necessarily mean that she grew up speaking her language, knowing her history, grew up as a member of a tribe, or any whole 9 yards worth of stuff. But she obviously is Native and from the area, no doubt. So, in your opinion, is that little girl, if she had Native ancestry and knew anything about her history, do you think she was Native? Just by my description, if you had seen her.
Yes.
So,
a person is Native. You don't. It's something that you're born with. It depends on who your parents are. It doesn't depend on whether or not you are a member of a quote or an Indian organization, a Native American organization. It doesn't depend on that. You are what you are when you're born.
Right.
So you're Native American, whether you're a member of a tribe or you are probably a member of a tribe, but you just don't know it.
Now, with Cherokee people specifically, there are groups of people. It's been said that we haven't always got along good together. And we'll mention that in just a minute with this first.
We share that with many other people.
There's one group of Cherokee people that like to patent and copyright everything that has that word on it, and oftentimes I find that there is some contrast in emotions. Is that politically correct? Is that how I say that? There may be some differences of opinion between those people and all the others. And I do know that today, this moment, and it may change after this episode of this podcast, but today at this moment, the Department of Interior says there's 4 different kinds of Cherokee people. There's Cherokee people from this tribe, Cherokee people from this tribe, Cherokee people from this tribe, and this last group is everybody else with Cherokee ancestry. They don't say that about every other group of Native people, although in some cases, especially here in the Southeast, they probably should have. But they don't say about every other group of people because Cherokee made up such a huge, part of the population, and still do today. With treaties, for example, the 1817 treaty, who we both have, great-grandfathers that benefited from the stipulations in that treaty, not to mention the whole state of Alabama was born the next year. But the 1835 treaty, whether it's disputed or undisputed, Article 12 says that, we're going to get some land and you can stay wherever you're at. Now, I remember we talked about great-great-great-granddad William Jones actually had a court case with the state of Alabama demanding that they allow him to be a citizen. Not everybody had that luxury of having this document that says that you are. But when we discussed it, we talked about our grandmothers, who were sisters, and how they and our great-grandparents didn't really talk about being Indian or being Cherokee. And it felt like it was because they had some level of fear of, being shipped off to Oklahoma.
Yes.
So you felt that firsthand.
Yes, I felt that. I even in my youth, I spent a lot of time with my grandmother and grandfather, and they never talked, never heard the word Native American. I never heard the word Cherokee or Indian. They never talked about it. I never heard them talk about it. But I just somehow or other always felt that we were a member of we were Indian. We were Native Americans. So later on, probably it was right at the end of before I retired from teaching, I was a member of the Bradley County Historical and Genealogical Society. And so we hosted Julia from the Oklahoma
from
tribe,
Cherokee Nation.
From the Cherokee Nation. And she came and taught a class for us about Cherokee history. And
that's that big book you showed me, right?
Yes. And she had a big manual of all of the treaties that the Cherokee Indians had made with the United States government. And so that was an absolute huge success. We had people coming from far distances away and registered for that class. It was like a 2 or 3 day.
I think you said it was sold out, didn't you?
It was sold out, and I'm going to put in a plug
Go
here
ahead.
for Johnny Majors.
Oh, okay.
Johnny Majors came, and that was soon after they had won the national championship for UT.
Okay.
When he was coach there.
And that attracted people to come too, I'm sure.
I didn't know that he was Native American.
Oh.
And I found out there.
Look, there's a lot of that.
Yes, yes. And so as Julia was going through the course and she was teaching us about the Cherokees and how they lived and how they changed over from the Indian Native American style of living, and the government wanted them to become farmers, etc. And so when she began telling us this and telling us about the daily life, I was just sitting there listening in awe because she was describing my life, the way that my grandparents lived and conducted themselves. And it's like, wow, we have been living the lifestyle of the Cherokees, the Native Americans, and I didn't realize that that's what it was. But it came to light as I listened to her and she taught that class. And that was just absolutely phenomenally fantastic for me to be able to understand that.
While we were at the Trail of Tears monument yesterday, I seen something I almost took a picture of because it was so inspiring. But I feel like when I read it, I didn't take a picture of it because I feel like me and this particular person may have butted heads in the past or may have not gotten along, although I have to admit I like him a lot better than certain other people today. But he is the one that actually wrote that manual, which is almost as thick. It's probably a little bigger than this stack of books here.
Yes.
That's Chad Smith, the chief then, wrote that manual, that history lesson on Cherokee history, and he comprised a lot of stuff. He's done a lot of stuff for his people. He really has, and I will certainly acknowledge that.
I agree with that.
There's been indirect contact he and I have had over the years about something or another, like when my family and I lived in Oklahoma, and he's like, well, that's not the number 12 on the clock, because we used to sell clocks to the Cherokee Nation's gift shop. And so we had to change the number 12 on the clock, but that was the number 12. But all that aside, he seems to have been doing a lot of good for his people, and indirectly and probably unknowingly, because of how strict their rules and which census you have to be on in order to be considered Cherokee, where we have family that are on the Henderson roll, and we have family that are on certain immigrant rolls, and we have family that are on the 1817 list, and here and there and all over, and people that aren't listed anywhere that are still Indian. His group today require you to have been on the Dawes rolls, which is from like 1907 to technically to 1909, and then eventually 1913. Although, there are loopholes in there too. their current governor, I have read, of Oklahoma, which is Governor Stitt, who was actually born in the town in Florida that me and my wife met, which is just, that's a lot to say. His family descend from the 1868, if I remember right, rolls, and the government told the Cherokee Nation, you've got to let these people be in your tribe. And I've thought about that so many times as my way to validate to them who I am, but I don't have to validate who I am to anybody. It's been my identity and your identity since you were small.
Yes.
So, people have different ideas about Native identity, and there was one little story, I wanted to save it, and I didn't mention it to you while we were talking about the course that you took, and how you said that, we just stayed here and we didn't, talk about it, and that's how we got to be here and didn't have to move to Oklahoma. There's a young man who is a member of one of the 3 tribes in North Alabama that said something that has always stuck with me, because he was going up against some people that were ridiculing him for being a member of a state-recognized tribe of Cherokee Indians. And he said to one of these people, a very young man, very wise in his age, I don't know if he was taught this or just figured it out on his own, but somebody was saying, well, if you didn't move to Oklahoma or don't have any family, then you're not Cherokee. And he says, my family is Cherokee. They stayed here and they got jobs.
Yes.
That's what he said. And he said they went to work and they went to school here, and it hit me real hard right there. And I'm like, I can't believe this kid got it, and the people that he's arguing with are 3 times his age and don't, he wasn't even arguing. He was pointing out a matter of fact, which is even better.
He was stating facts.
He was stating a fact. But anyway, just to sum things up, like I say, it's been an absolute pleasure and an honor, and I can't wait to come back and visit again. Our grandmothers were sisters, so
could I ask you one other thing? If we could, as we went out to the Trail of Tears and looked at the monuments, if you could just mention a few of the names of the people that we were related to, and some
absolutely.
of the people that you have told me on this visit that I'm related to. I had no idea that they were in my ancestry.
There's a laundry list of them.
Like the Gunters from Guntersville, Alabama. Or
John Welch, he's on that list, and the list of the people that were on those marble-looking pillars, they were from, as it was written on the top of the first stone, they were from the Henderson Rolls.
Yes.
And so there's probably 20 or maybe 25 family members that are on the Henderson Rolls, both from Alabama and from Tennessee. And you'll notice that their location on the pillars said where they were taking a record from. And there were some things that I can't say were incorrect, because times change, and I've got a copy of the Henderson Rolls on my phone, and I've read through those names so many times. But for example, John Ross's name comes up on the Tennessee Rolls, but we know he was born in Alabama.
Absolutely, yes.
So there's some of that kind of thing. Ross was possibly a distant cousin, but I'm not really sure. I think we're probably cousins to some of his cousins is what it is. There are Adairs in the family. There are Berries in the family. And like we were talking yesterday too, one of the things that really is interesting to me is how you'll look at a family and you'll see first name is John or Roger or some common name. The next name is something like Barry, for example, how we were talking. And then the third name is their last name. And Barry, unlike it is in like European or South American countries, may not have been his mother's maiden name, but it was one of his grandparents' last names or one of his great-grandparents' last names, and it could have been on either side,
Yes.
There's a lot of that in my family, and there is some of it in our shared family, but in mine, for example, there are Guns that have that as a middle name, that are grandparents were Guns or what have you. And then we seen one on the pillars yesterday, and you mentioned that they used to live, and this ain't the one you're thinking about either. It was the Clouds that lived on some of the family land. If I remember right, you said that so-and-so Cloud.
Yes.
So the Clouds were on the Henderson rolls, and one of the Clouds that was in our family that lived in Tennessee that I haven't even mentioned to you is Greenberry Cloud.
Yes, Greenberry.
You know Greenberry Cloud.
Yes.
But he stayed in Tennessee. He didn't leave. I've got his death records. I've got the actual copy of his death records when he passed away in Tennessee. That was Greenberry Cloud.
Okay, so do you remember the connection that we were discussing about John Jolly?
Oh yeah. John Jolly's daughter, Sally, married Samuel Isaac Upton, our fifth great granddad.
Okay.
Yep. So, what's funny about that, and I wasn't going to bring this part up, but you whittled it out of me.
We teachers have a way of doing that.
Yeah. So
we get this knowledge out of our.
My wife and I mentioned we spent a great deal of time in Oklahoma. We were actually passing through on our way south from Wyoming, where we were living. We had some property in Wyoming. We were living there, and we stopped. And some of my cousins that are from Alabama were living in Oklahoma, and one of them, I won't mention his name because he's kind of camera shy about things, even though his kids have been in all kinds of Indian movies and all kinds of this, that, and the other. He doesn't like me to mention his name, so I won't. But he invited us to come and hang out with them, and we did for a short while, and it was nice and stuff, and we went to some neat places and seen some neat stuff and talked to some nice people, and a lot of them in Oklahoma treat us just like we're family, although of course we probably are, a lot of them, but while we were there, I got involved selling my flutes and selling other stuff that we made to the Nation's gift shop. And we spent some time meeting and speaking with some of the Historical Society. And that was a time point in Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma history that I can point out where tides were kind of changing. This was after, I believe, Chad's book that we mentioned had come out, and the lady that came here and taught it in Tennessee, taught the course and stuff. It was after that time period, and they started realizing nationality was important, and they wanted to be, and I'll say nationalists. To my understanding of the word nationalist, that's kind of what they were doing, kind of like we have in the United States today. We're trying to be Americans, Mm-hmm. And they were trying to maintain the culture primarily for themselves. Now it's evolved a great deal to where they want to stay mainly people in Oklahoma are people from Oklahoma, and that's it. Mm-hmm. We don't talk about them other people from outside of Oklahoma. But in recent times, I have fell back on my little black book of phone numbers, and I called somebody in the Cherokee Nation's Historical Society, and I said, you know who Chief Jolly was, right? And they're like, yeah, we know who Chief Jolly was. And this is one of the heads of the Historical Society, the Cherokee Nation's Historical Society, mind you. I called internal office, and I said, Chief Jolly died in Weber's Falls, and that's where he's buried. They're like, yeah, we know that. There's a monument for him. Mm-hmm. And I said, he had several kids, and we talked about a couple of them. And I said he had a daughter named Sally, and he's like, yeah. And I said, I've got a history records showing that Sally married Samuel Isaac Upton. And he said, yeah, I believe that's right. And I said, theoretically, if Samuel Isaac Upton and Sally had children and they stayed in Tennessee, and then eventually them children had children of their own, and eventually down the road they may have moved to Alabama, I said, could the fifth great grandchildren of Samuel Isaac Upton, could they come back and join your tribe? And he's like, no. He said the only people that can join the tribe, and it's in their constitution, by the way, the only people, that can join the tribe from outside are direct descendants of people who were on the Dawes rolls. I'm like, okay. I said, even though, there's historical records of, Chief Jolly, he's like, even though it doesn't matter who it is, they're not on the rolls, and they're not members, and they cannot become a member of the nation, which was, like I mentioned a moment ago, was kind of true, and kind of, there's not a lot of people that know about the 1868 people that were put in the nation. And I found it by accident. A contrasting person to who I am had mentioned it haphazardly, and probably somewhat on purpose, that their governor of the Oklahoma, his family were 1868 people.
Okay.
So there's, where there's a will, there's a way, but there were great willful people, and that's what I wanted to get here to on our closure. There were great willful people here, like Doublehead, and Doublehead was said to have had one of the biggest personalities and loudest personalities, and you can read about Doublehead and some of his history from even modern records, but he had a huge personality, and he didn't do things a certain way. And here's that word that a lot of people don't like, Chickamauga Cherokees. And the Chickamauga, I guess when a lot of people start looking into it, they realize the Chickamauga descent, which those of you out there, this is your school lesson for today, to go find out more about Chickamauga people, because I'm not going to talk about it on this episode, but the clashing of people who have that word in their name with other people, so much so that eventually they even started calling a lot of supporters of Chickamauga people. Now, I'll get some flack on this, I know, and I can't wait to see what people have to say about it, but the Chickamauga people eventually became the Treaty Party folks. I mean, I can't say all of them were Chickamaugas, but my study of the history, it looks like that. And what was that one thing I told you yesterday when we were out at the monument? It was interesting that there were people that were from the quote-unquote Ross Party and people that were from the quote-unquote Treaty Party that were on that list that were shipping people to Oklahoma.
Yeah, they were the leaders of different groups.
Yeah. And now I know...
And we need to mention that too, that at that monument where we went to see the Trail of Tears monuments.
Yeah.
That is at Blythe Ferry.
Right.
And that is one of the areas where many of the Native Americans, the Cherokees, were boarded and moved out on the Trail of Tears toward Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Major amount of the Cherokee Indians left from that port.
Right. And there's something else too when you say the name Blythe, because you don't see that word a lot. I looked it up in the family tree, of course. It's the first thing I always do these days. Thank goodness there's so many people listed on that record. But you had mentioned was it the Blythes that had come in and lived near the family or something? I'm trying to remember. There was the Hare. That's
Conrad Hare.
Conrad Hare's family had came and lived on the family land.
When we lived in the Cleveland, Bradley County area, we lived on Harris Creek Road.
Right.
And Conrad Hare, the place where he lived, was very near where we lived.
Now, there's one other thing too, and I'm not here to talk about family history. That's what I was here to talk to you about. That was our private discussions. But I will mention something that was interesting when you start seeing those names, and when I start looking them up, like we talked, and finding who was what and who was what. Of course, our grandmothers grew up on Merrill Mountain.
Yes.
In Grant, Alabama. And Merrill Mountain once belonged to the Merrill family. It was part of the 1817 treaty reservations that his family received that. And the owner of Merrill Mountain was the father of our great aunt's husband.
Yes.
And that's, of course, indirect descent. Doesn't necessarily mean anything. And you couldn't join a tribe from having that kind of connection. We are members of a state tribe because of our direct connection to countless other people.
Yes.
But showing the relationship between all of these people, the fact that our family grew up on Parcher's Cove, And the people out there don't know who Parcher's Cove, Parch Corn.
Chief Parch Corn.
Yeah, people don't know who that was.
Right.
But he was one of the recipients of the land. And then we have, like I said, in the family, we have two great-grandfathers, William Jones and Stephen, Willis Stevens. And Willis Stevens was actually not a blood relative. He married one of our great-grandmothers, if I'm not mistaken, to get her land, because it says on the 1817 treaty list that he received his land in right of his wife. And then later on, he actually married Catherine Cheek, who had her own land from the reservation list, 1817 list. But all that stuff is such great information. And like I say, there's so much history out there. When I start looking at these people and finding out their cousins, aunts, uncles, and you start looking at that, you start to build a history that hasn't been taught in the school system. And to close things, like I said, this is something, this book here is one that we both have. This is the book on Doublehead, The Last Chickamauga Cherokee Chief, written by Rickie Butch Walker. Rickie is from Alabama. He did not pay me to say this, so Rickie, I hope it's okay that I say this. Excellent books that he's put out. If you're interested in reading about Native American history that may not be taught in the school boards and what have you, that's a good one. He is a member of a tribe in Alabama, as having read the back pages of this book. This is an amazing book that has some great history in it. And when Ruth and I were going through it, we're like, well, wait a minute, that's our family, and that's our family. And there's really, there's lists of these people here in the back that I'm flipping to, and there's just so many of these people I can look through and see their names in our history. The Appalachian Indians of the Warrior Mountains, History and Culture, Rickie Butch Walker, great one. This one is, this is the one that I think I'm about to buy myself. I have some of these other ones. I have that one, but I don't have this one. The Appalachian Indian Trails of the Chickamauga Lower Cherokee Settlements by Rickie Butch Walker. That's Rickie Butch Walker, excuse me. A very good book here. On the back of it, there's a picture of him touching something that we were talking about.
Yes. Let's do this. Let's do this. The trees.
Okay. So there's a picture of him touching this knee tree, we call it. But those knee trees are markers. And you won't read about this in history books, not in public schools especially, and probably not in college. But those knee trees show you directions and tell you where to go and what have you.
And they tell you that there is an area very near them. Mm-hmm. There's water. Yep. And there's a place to camp.
That's right.
That's what they indicate.
And oftentimes they point the direction.
They do. The way the knee's going, mm-hmm. pointing, is the direction you need to go now, if you're on a particular trail. I can tell you from experience, because we were flipping through one of these books and there was a picture in it, and there was one of the knee trees that is on, and I'm not going to mention the name because I don't want a lot of people going out looking for it, but there's one of the knee trees on one of the family's properties that was from one of those reservations that also has something we call a marker, a boundary stone on it. Mm-hmm. And that boundary stone is about 1 story high. And I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to describe it in great detail, because if I do, you'll once again want to go looking for it. And we like to keep some of those things private. But it's on family land, and that boundary stone is a significant thing. But the reason I even bring it up is because what's amazing to me is there are no other stones like it anywhere around, and it's not the only boundary stone. I don't know where or how any of that happened. I wish I did. Maybe we could go back and talk to Great-Grandpa Doublehead and see what he had going on. He might have been able to tell us, because chances are him or Black Fox or somebody probably put them stones there somehow, or at least erected them in the way. But I will tell you, those boundary stones, as massive as they are hard to find. And I will tell you one thing that I hadn't mentioned to you. When Jesse and I lived in Oklahoma, one of our friends was one of the first families that settled there. I'm not going to mention his name, but he
and his family were one of the first groups that settled there. And they had some of the good property in Oklahoma, and it was on the side of a river, and there was one of those boundary stones there.
Oh, wow.
So the boundary stones probably happened somewhere around the time people moved there, because it was definitely a Cherokee boundary stone. And something that was odd to him and to me and to his mom and his grandmother is that the Army Corps of Engineers very quietly one day had a barge that had some kind of equipment on it, and it was dredging the river as it goes, dredged it right up to his property, had a crane on that barge and lift that rock up and stuck it on top of this thing. And that undescribed, I wish he was watching, that undescribed part of the stone that I'm not going to tell other people what it was, was actually on that stone, just like it is in our one in Alabama that we've been to.
Oh, wow.
And they picked it up and they put it on that barge and left. Never word one to the family. So if you know these people in Oklahoma, outside of Tahlequah, if you know that family, you might want to ask them. He might tell you what was on that stone, because he and I had long talks about it. But I never shared any information with him about ours, because it wasn't until a little bit later on that I had the opportunity to see it myself. The last book, this is a neat one, and I've come to some of my own conclusions just by the title here in my own history, but it's Warrior Mountains Folklore, American Indian and Celtic History of the Southeast.
Yes, it connects us to the Celts.
Yeah, and I know some of those connections myself, which would be a whole nother long discussion. But once again, another book by Rickie Butch Walker. Got some neat pictures on the front of it. Some of these places I recognize. One of them looks like my dad's old house that he grew up in.
And these are only a few of the books that he's written. He's written many others also.
And like I said, you can read more about him, I'm sure, on his website and elsewhere.
Has a website.
But lots of good stuff. And once again, more homework for anybody that's watching and reading. I recommend rewinding and figuring out what these names are and look those books up. And I really do recommend getting them, because they actually are a written version from someone that his last name is Walker, we're probably related to, but we haven't discussed anything with this gentleman in person, but it reminds us both of so much of our family history.
So much of our family history is in his books, and we are most appreciative
Absolutely.
of him publishing these.
Yeah, because this is the written version of some of our verbal and oral stories that we know.
Yes, it is.
Good stuff. Good stuff. But anyway, that's it for this episode. I appreciate you guys watching. Make sure you check out all the others and the upcoming, because like this one, we have so many great things to come, and hopefully one day Ruth will let me come back and we'll make another episode on something probably mildly controversial again.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate you. And
it's been a wonderful visit.
Love you so much.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You.
I don't think so either.
But I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to ask you about people's identity and whether federal or state recognized, or even if they're not a member of a tribe, does that, are they still Native? And I just want to get your opinion. You talk freely and open, however you say, and if you accidentally slip up and say bullshit, then I'll just delete it or I'll bleep it.
That's not in my vocabulary.
It's in mine though.
I know. You're the one I'm worried about.